At 9 a.m. on a Tuesday morning at Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas, with 12 investors in the hospitality suite and the demonstration scheduled for 10 o'clock, Vivian Stowe fired me in front of my engineering team, 2 visiting investors who had come down to see the car, and my 7-year-old daughter who was sitting near the engineering workstations with her drawing pad on her knee. I want to tell you what I was doing when she fired me. I was trying to prevent exactly what happened 5 hours later. The SR7 was Stowe Racing Technologies' flagship prototype. 4 years of development, $6 million of Vivian's own capital, another $11 million from investors who were in the building that morning to watch it perform, a fully enclosed electric racing vehicle built around a proprietary drivetrain and battery management system that Vivian intended to license to racing teams the way traditional engine manufacturers had always licensed powertrains. The idea was genuinely good. The technology was genuinely capable. The company had built something real. What the company had not resolved in the 2 weeks before the demonstration was a thermal management issue in the battery management system that I had identified, documented, and escalated 3 times. The morning of October 15, 2024, I ran the pre-start diagnostic on the SR7 at 7 a.m. as part of my standard preparation role and saw, in the temperature differential data between the primary and secondary battery cooling circuits, exactly what I'd been concerned about for 2 weeks. The differential was building at a rate that would produce a thermal fault at sustained high power output. Not immediately, not at low speed, at the kind of sustained output the demonstration lap around COTA's full circuit would demand within 3 to 4 laps. I went to Beth Lund, our lead software engineer, at 7:15. Beth went to Vivian. Vivian was with the investors in the hospitality suite and sent back word through her assistant that the demonstration was proceeding on schedule. I went back to the diagnostic terminal and began a detailed thermal stress analysis, the procedure that would give me the specific fault threshold data I needed to either confirm the issue was manageable or establish that the demonstration could not safely proceed. I had been running it for 40 minutes when Vivian came down from the hospitality suite with 2 investors who wanted to see the car. She saw me at the terminal. She saw the unauthorized test sequence running on the screen. She made an assessment in approximately 10 seconds. She fired me in front of everyone. I shut down the analysis. I logged out of the system cleanly. Every session properly closed, every data file properly saved to the company server. I closed the laptop. I looked at Beth, who was standing 5 feet away and who knew exactly what I had been doing and who looked at the floor. I said to Vivian, "The temperature differential in the secondary cooling circuit is 17 degrees above the normal operating variance. At sustained high power, the thermal management system will enter fault mode. I have the analysis on the company server if anyone wants to review it." She said, "Security will walk you out." I said, "That won't be necessary." I looked at Sadie. She was 7 years old and she had her drawing pad on her knee and she had been watching everything with the complete stillness of a child who has decided this is a moment for being very quiet. She looked at me. I said, "Come on, Sade, we're going." She put her drawing pad in her backpack. She came to me without hurrying. She took my hand. We walked out of the paddock together. At the gate, without turning around, I said to whoever was close enough to hear, "Don't run it above 60% power output." The demonstration was scheduled at 100%. 5 hours later, at lap 3, the SR7's battery thermal management system entered fault mode exactly the way my analysis had predicted it would. The car came to a controlled stop in the infield. 3 investors withdrew their letters of intent by late afternoon. A licensing negotiation that was weeks from closing collapsed by evening. Vivian's CFO called an emergency board meeting. 48 hours after she fired me, the board called and asked me to come back. This is the story of those 48 hours, and of what I was doing at the diagnostic terminal when it all started. I grew up in Kannapolis, North Carolina, 8 miles from Charlotte Motor Speedway, in a town where motorsport is not a hobby or an industry, but an atmosphere. The smell of racing fuel is what summer smells like there. The sound of engines on a Saturday morning is background the way birdsong is background somewhere else. My father worked at a NASCAR engine building shop for 22 years, not as an engineer, as a machinist, the man who made the parts that the engineers designed. He spent 22 years making things with a precision that was not about speed or efficiency, but about accuracy. The specific accuracy that comes from caring whether the thing you are making is correct, not just acceptable, and understanding the difference between those two states in your hands rather than only in your head. He said it more than once, but the time it landed hardest was when he was watching me struggle with a tolerance check on something I had built incorrectly and was trying to rationalize as close enough. He said, "The part either fits or it doesn't. Close enough is how things break." I went to North Carolina State, studied mechanical engineering, graduated in 2007, and went directly into motorsport. A NASCAR Cup team first, then sports car racing, then a period at a Formula E technical partner in 2018 and 2019 that gave me my first deep exposure to electric powertrain integration. That exposure changed what I understood about where the sport was going and what skills would matter in the decade ahead. I met Karen in 2012. We married in 2014. Sadie was born in 2017. Karen died in December 2021 from a rare autoimmune condition. 2 years from the first symptoms to the end, the kind of illness that gives you enough time to understand what is happening and not enough time to change it. Sadie was 4 years old. I took 3 months. Then I came back because Sadie needed a father who was functioning, and because the work had always been the place where the problems had solutions if you were willing to stay with them. I joined Stowe Racing Technologies in January 2022 at 36 years old, when the company was 18 months old and in the process of building its first complete prototype. My role was lead powertrain integration engineer, the person responsible for making the electric motor, the battery management system, and the vehicle control electronics work as a unified system rather than 3 separate components sharing a chassis. Not the software lead, not the mechanical designer, the integration engineer, the one who understood how the systems talked to each other and what happened when the conversation broke down. Sadie had been to the shop from the beginning. I brought her on Saturdays and school holidays. She had a spot near the engineering workstations, a specific chair that had migrated from one part of the room to another over 2 years in the way that children's claimed spots migrate, always ending up where she could see the most. She did drawings and homework and asked questions that I sometimes had to think about carefully before answering, because the questions had the quality of someone trying to genuinely understand a system rather than satisfy a passing curiosity. She had been there for the SR7's first power-on, for its first rolling test, for every significant development milestone. She understood, at 7 years old, more about electric powertrain integration than she had any particular reason to. She understood it because she had been paying attention for 2 years, and because paying attention is how understanding happens, and she had learned this from watching engineers for long enough that it had become her own practice. She wore gear print socks to every significant session. She had 2 pairs, a left sock from one pair and a right sock from another, because the left from the original pair had worn through at the heel in the spring, and the combination she had arrived at was apparently the correct one. She wore them the morning of October 15th. Vivian Stowe founded Stowe Racing Technologies in Austin, Texas in 2019 with $6 million of her own capital and a vision that was, in the most straightforward assessment, ahead of the market. The vision, a proprietary electric racing drivetrain system developed independently, licensed to racing teams the way engine manufacturers had always, licensed engines. A recurring revenue model that would make Stowe Racing an infrastructure company for the electric motorsport era rather than a team that won or lost on any given race weekend. It was a good idea. The technology the company had developed over 5 years was genuinely capable. Vivian had made the decisions that needed to be made to get to this point, and she had made them with the focused energy of a founder who understood that the window for being first in a new market does not stay open indefinitely. What had changed in the final 6 months before the demonstration was the relationship between Vivian's control of the company and the engineering complexity the SR7 had reached. As the prototype neared completion, the technical decisions had become more interconnected and more consequential, and Vivian had responded to this by tightening rather than loosening her authority over them. More approval required, more of her time in the engineering spaces, more decisions flowing through her rather than through the engineers who understood what the decisions were about. I had raised the thermal management concern for the first time at the weekly engineering review on October 1st, 2 weeks before the demonstration. I had documented it in an email to Vivian on October 7th. I had asked Beth to escalate it directly on October 12th, 3 days before the demonstration. Each time, the response had been a version of the same message. The schedule was fixed, the team had confidence in the system, the concern was noted. What the concern was not, in 2 weeks of raising it, was addressed. On the morning of October 15th, I arrived at Circuit of the Americas at 7 a.m. and ran the pre-start diagnostic, and the data told me in the clearest possible terms what it had been suggesting for 2 weeks. I went to Beth. Beth went to Vivian. Vivian was with the investors. I went back to the terminal. I had been there 40 minutes when Vivian came down. The rest, you know. Sadie and I drove from COTA to the house on the east side of Austin where we had lived since I joined Stowe Racing. The house with the kitchen table where Sadie did homework most evenings, and Karen's photograph on the mantel in the living room and the spare bedroom, I had converted to a workspace where I had done some of my best thinking on the SR7's integration architecture over 2 years of evenings after Sadie was asleep. It was 11 in the morning. Sadie should have been at school, but school had been closed for a district professional development day, which was why she had been at COTA in the first place. She sat in the passenger seat with her backpack on her lap and looked out the window at Austin moving past. She said, after a while, "Did you do something wrong?" I thought about how to answer this accurately. I did something without permission that I had been trying to get permission for. The reason I didn't have permission was because the person who needed to give it wasn't listening. Sadie processed this. "That's not the same as wrong." I said, "No, it's not." She looked out the window for another moment. "Is the car going to be okay?" I said I didn't know. I said I hoped so. She nodded and went back to looking out the window. She did not ask anything else on the drive home. She had her mother's quality of knowing when a conversation was complete and when pushing it further would not add anything. At home, I made lunch. Sadie ate and then went to her room with her drawing pad. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and opened the company server remotely. I still had access, the termination paperwork had not yet processed, and my credentials were still active, and looked at the thermal stress analysis I had saved at 7:51 a.m. The timestamp was there. The data was there. The predicted fault threshold was there, matched against the operating parameters of the demonstration run, showing clearly what would happen and approximately when. I closed the laptop. I put the phone down and looked at the thermal analysis still open on my screen for a moment before closing that too. I had predicted this. Being right about it did not feel the way I had expected it to feel. It felt like nothing except the specific weight of being right about something you had hoped not to be right about. The particular heaviness of a thing confirmed that you had wanted to remain a concern rather than a fact. I sat at the kitchen table for a while. Outside, the October light was doing what it does in Austin in the fall, softening from the summer's intensity into something more patient, the city settling into the season the way places settle when the heat finally lets go. My phone buzzed at 2:47 p.m. A text from Beth. 2 words. It stopped. I knew what she meant. I sat with it for a moment, then I typed back, "Is everyone okay?" She replied, "Yes. Controlled stop. Car is fine. Investors are not." I put the phone face down on the table. Sadie appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at me. She said, "What happened?" I said, "The car stopped on track during the demonstration." She was quiet for a moment. "Like you said it would?" I said, "Yes." She came and sat across from me at the kitchen table. She looked at the face-down phone. Then she looked at me. She said, "Are you sad?" I thought about this honestly, the way she deserved. Not about being right about the car. The car deserved a better day than it got. She considered this. Then she said, "The car will get another day." I looked at her. She was 7 years old and she had been present for every significant moment in the SR7's development for 2 years, and she understood, without needing to articulate it, that a machine that takes 4 years to build is not finished on any single day, that it continues, and that what happens on a given day is part of the continuing, not the end of it. I said, "Yes, it will." She went back to her room. I sat at the kitchen table until it was time to make dinner. Beth Lund had worked at Stowe Racing since 2020. 4 years, longer than me, longer than most of the engineering team. She was the lead software engineer, the person responsible for the vehicle control system and its integration with my hardware systems. The work we did together was not collaborative in the casual sense. It was collaborative in the structural sense, the way the software and hardware of a complex system are collaborative because neither one functions correctly without the other, and the person who manages one must understand the other well enough to speak its language. She had seen the pre-start data at 6:50 a.m. on October 15th. She had thought the same thing I thought. She had been on her way to tell me when she found me already at the terminal running the analysis. She had stood next to me for 20 minutes while I worked, looking at the data with me, before Vivian came down. When Vivian fired me, Beth had been 5 feet away. She had looked at the floor. She had thought about that for the rest of Tuesday and through Tuesday night and through Wednesday morning. At 7:30 a.m. on Wednesday, 36 hours after the firing, she went to Patricia Ochoa. Patricia was the chair of Stowe Racing's board, a woman in her late 50s who had been on the board for 2 years and who had a specific quality that the best board members have. She asked questions before she made conclusions, and she listened to the answers as if they might change what she concluded, because they sometimes did. Beth put a folder on Patricia's desk. Inside was the full account. The pre-start data, my thermal stress analysis time-stamped 7:51 a.m., the sequence of escalations over 2 weeks, the October 1st engineering review, the October 7th email, the October 12th conversation, the demonstration telemetry showing the fault developing exactly as the analysis had predicted, the post-demonstration communications from the 3 withdrawn investors. She said, "He was trying to stop what happened. I watched it happen and I didn't say anything and I should have." Patricia read the folder. She asked 3 questions. Beth answered all 3. Patricia called the board meeting forward by 4 hours. I found out later that the board meeting lasted 40 minutes. The decision to rescind the termination and request my return took 22 of them. The remaining 18 were about what had happened to the company in 48 hours and what needed to happen next. My phone rang at 10 a.m. Wednesday. I was in the spare bedroom, the workspace, reviewing the thermal analysis and building a more detailed failure mode document. Not because anyone had asked me to, but because it was the correct thing to do with the information I had, and because sitting with the data was better than sitting without it. Sadie was at school. It was Wednesday. School was not closed. The call was from Patricia Ochoa. She said the board had reviewed the materials Beth had presented. She said the termination was being rescinded effective immediately. She said the board required my continued involvement in the SR7 program as a condition of their governance going forward. I listened. When she finished, I said, "I want to speak with Vivian directly before I agree to anything." Patricia said, "That's reasonable. She's available now." I called Vivian. I will not tell you the details of that conversation because they belong to the conversation and not to the story. What I will tell you is that it lasted 22 minutes and that it was honest in ways that honesty is difficult to be when the facts are what they are, and the only option is to say them plainly. What I will tell you is that when I called Arturo Vega that evening, Arturo was 57 years old and had spent 30 years as a race engineer in IMSA and IndyCar, and who had been my mentor from my first years in the sport, and who had heard through the motorsport community, as he always heard things, that something had happened at Stowe Racing. When I told him about the conversation with Vivian, he said, "Honesty on the wrong side of a mistake is the hardest kind." I said, "Yes, it is." He said, "Is the car going to get fixed?" I said, "It's already being fixed." He said, "Good, that's what matters." I went back to Stowe Racing on Thursday morning. The thermal management issue was addressed over 2 weeks. A recalibration of the secondary cooling circuit's flow rate control valve, which was my work, combined with a software update to the battery management system's thermal protection logic, which was Beth's work that she had already been drafting for 48 hours before I returned. We worked on it the way we had always worked on the integration problems, his hardware and her software, as Arturo once described it, 2 people solving one problem in 2 languages. We did not talk explicitly about Tuesday morning, about what she had and hadn't done. We didn't need to. The work was the conversation. The work was where things got resolved between engineers who respected each other and had a shared problem and understood that the shared problem was what mattered. The rescheduled demonstration was 6 weeks later at the same venue. A cool Saturday morning in early December. The light different from October's. The circuit quiet in the specific way that places are quiet on early weekend mornings when the week's noise hasn't arrived yet. I was in the engineering area with the telemetry screens. Beth was beside me. The SR-7 went out with its test driver and ran 12 laps. The temperature differential stayed within nominal range throughout. The thermal management system did not enter fault mode. The car ran the way it was built to run, clean and complete and demonstrating exactly what the technology was capable of. 2 of the 3 investors who had withdrawn came back. The licensing negotiation was reinstated. The conversation in the hospitality suite was, by the time I heard about it later from Patricia, different in quality from what it had been in October. More grounded, more specific, more like the conversation that happens when people have seen a company handle a failure and understand something about what the company is made of. When the SR-7 came in after the 12th lap, Beth looked at the telemetry screen and said, "Nominal throughout?" I said, "Yes." She said, "You knew it would be." I said, "I knew what we fixed. That's not the same thing." She looked at me. "Is it different?" I thought about it. Yes. You never know a system completely. You know what you've addressed and you watch the rest. She went back to the telemetry. Neither of us said anything else for a while. The screens showed a car doing exactly what it was designed to do. That was enough. A Saturday morning, 6 weeks after the rescheduled demonstration. I was in the spare bedroom workspace in the house on Austin's east side. Sadie was awake. I could hear her in the kitchen, the specific sequence of sounds that meant she was making herself breakfast without asking for help, which she had been doing for about 3 months now, with the focused independence of a 7-year-old who has decided that a thing is within her capability and he intends to prove it. I was writing the formal technical report on the October 15th incident, the full account from pre-start diagnostic to rescheduled demonstration, documenting the fault, the root cause, the fix, and the validation data. This report would go to the board, to the engineering team, and to the licensing partners as part of the technical disclosure package. It was the kind of document that existed to make sure that what had been learned did not stay learned only in the heads of the 2 people who had learned it, because heads are not permanent and institutions need documents. I was on the root cause section, the most important section, the one that required the most precision, because root cause analysis that is too narrow produces fixes that address the symptom, and root cause analysis that is too broad produces conclusions that are true but not actionable, and the skill is finding the analysis that is exactly as specific as it needs to be, and no more. Sadie appeared in the doorway. She was wearing the gearprint socks, the left one from the pair with the faded heel, the right one from the other pair. She had a bowl of cereal in both hands, and she was managing it with the careful attention of someone who has learned that moving too fast with a full bowl has predictable consequences. She said, "Are you writing the report?" I said, "Yes." She came into the room and sat in the chair at the corner, the one that had migrated to various parts of the engineering space at Stowe Racing over 2 years, and was now in this room, in this corner, because some things follow you home. She put the cereal bowl on her knee and looked at the screen over my shoulder. She said, "Is it about what happened?" I said, "It's about what we found and what we fixed." She ate a spoonful of cereal and thought about this distinction. Then she said, "Is it going to happen again?" I turned from the screen and looked at her. She was 7 years old and had her mother's directness and her own specific quality of attention that had been sharpened by 2 years of watching engineers solve problems. The quality of someone who wants the accurate answer rather than the comfortable one. I said, "A different thing might, not this one." She nodded. Once, slowly, in the way she nodded when an answer was the correct kind of answer, not necessarily reassuring but honest in the specific way that she had learned to distinguish from reassuring. She said, "Can I come to the next test?" I said, "Yes." She finished her cereal. She put the bowl on the desk beside my laptop. She looked at the photograph I had pinned to the wall above the desk. The SR7 in the COTA paddock on the morning of October 15th, the car in the flat early light before anything had happened, looking exactly like what it was, something that had taken 4 years to build and that still had years of work ahead of it before it would be everything it was capable of becoming. I had printed it myself and pinned it the week I came back, not as a reminder of what had gone wrong, not as a trophy, as a record of where the work was, not finished, not failed, continuing forward the way work continues when the people doing it understand that a setback is not an ending and a correction is not a conclusion. Sadie looked at the photograph for a moment. Then she looked at me. She said, "The car looks good in the morning." I said, "Yes, it does." She picked up her bowl and went back to the kitchen. I went back to the root cause section. Outside, the December light was coming through the window at the angle it comes at in Austin in winter, low and clear and without the summer's weight, the kind of light that shows you exactly what is in front of you. The report was on the screen. The data was in the data. The car was at the circuit, ready for whatever came next. My father used to say that the part either fits or it doesn't. Close enough is how things break. The part fit now. We had made sure of it. Before you go, I want to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where you knew something was wrong, raised it the way you were supposed to raise it, and watched it get dismissed, and then watched what you predicted happen anyway? Most people who have been in that situation know exactly what it costs. Not just professionally, in every direction. What did you do with it? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. If this story stayed with you today, share it with one person who needs to hear it. You already know who that is. And if you're new here, subscribe. Every week, a story like this one. Real people, real decisions, the kind that stay with you.